Our Bible word is Luke 19, the verses 38 to 40. Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest. And some of the Pharisees called to him from the crowd, Teacher, rebuke your disciples. But he answered and said to them, I tell you that if these should keep silent, the stones would immediately cry out. So this passage refers to what's called the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem. Now, this is a very big and significant theme in the Gospel of Luke, is that Jesus made this journey to Jerusalem. And this something that's also called the travel narrative, which extends roughly from the end of chapter 9 to chapter 19. If we go to chapter 9, verses 51, now it came to pass, when the time had come for him to be received up, that he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem. So from then on, the narrative is about Luke basically explaining Jesus' journey to Jerusalem. Also, earlier in chapter 9, on the Mount of Transfiguration, where Moses and Elijah appears, Luke says they spoke or they discussed the decease or the exodus that he was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. There's also these other markers along the way where Luke explains to us Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. It's a very significant. Also, what's important is if we go to chapter 13, if we go read there verses 34 and 35, Jesus says, Nevertheless, I must journey today, tomorrow, and the day following, for it cannot be that a prophet should perish outside of Jerusalem. Now, this is significant because what will happen when Jesus arrives in Jerusalem? Because this is now the place where God is present among his people, because that's the site of the temple. It's the holy city. So the issue is, how would Jerusalem respond to Jesus? Not so much other cities, it's important, but Jerusalem, I mean, that's like the center of their world, so to speak. But Jesus also says, we go to the next verse, O Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. And Jesus speaks there, I wanted to gather you as a hen gathers her chicks, but it didn't happen. Now there's also a foreboding here that in the end Jerusalem will reject Jesus. He also writes, take note of what is said in verse 35, where Jesus says, See, your house is left to you desolate. In other words, from the vantage point of eternity or after the crucifixion of Jesus, your house is left desolate. In other words, your temple has been abandoned by God. God's no longer present in the temple. That's what that house refers to, is the temple. It's really no longer operating. Even the sacrificial system is now worth nothing. Those temple offerings, animals, etc., it's now meaningless. God has removed his presence from the temple. Then Jesus goes on to say, And assuredly, I say to you, you shall not see me until the time comes when you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. In other words, the day Jerusalem will say to Jesus, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. That's the day that Jerusalem will see Jesus, when they recognize him as the Messiah. So, Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem, and he was on foot. Now for the last bit, he wants a colt to sit on. And it looks like Jesus made arrangements before the time, because he sent two of his disciples ahead, whether it's to Bethpage or Bethany, we do not know. Which two disciples, we do not know. But Jesus sent them ahead and said, There's a colt, untie it, bring it to me. And that's what they also did. So it can also imply to Jesus' vision as a prophet, his insight into what they will do there. So now the travel narrative is over, where Jesus goes to Jerusalem. He's here now. Now he's descending the Mount of Olives on a donkey. And of course, this is also significant because it's an act. It's a prophetic act. It's an act of eschatological fulfillment. In other words, eschatology means end time, something pertaining to the end time. Because here Jesus is entering Jerusalem as the promised Savior, the promised Messiah, the anointed one. And it goes back to the words of the prophet Zechariah, specifically chapter 9, verses 9 to 10. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey. Also, what's significant is said in verses 10. It says there, He shall speak peace to the nations. In other words, Jesus, as the Messiah, what he enacts here is not he's going to bring war. He's not going to be that expected Messiah, like a warrior like David who will fight the Romans and kill. He is the Messiah entering Jerusalem on a donkey who will bring peace. He's here to establish peace. Now, of course, will Jerusalem recognize this type of Messiah? Will they recognize who Jesus is and the type of Messiah that he represents? It also says now, though, it's those who accompany him, who, because the disciples, they put him on the donkey. In other words, they also recognizing Jesus is this Messiah. He is this royal figure who's entering, the King of Israel who is now entering Jerusalem. And then the people who accompany Jesus, they say these words of acclamation. Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest. So remember, it's not Jerusalem who's telling these words to Jesus. Remember the previous passage of chapter 13, where Jesus is, you will not see me unless you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Yeah, it's not Jerusalem who's telling these words to Jesus. It's his followers who came from Galilee. They are saying this, blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. And now the Pharisees, they symbolize Jerusalem's response to Jesus, because Jerusalem rejects Jesus. They're not saying, blessed is he who comes in the Lord. The Pharisees and later the high priests, etc., they reject Jesus. And here it's already symbolized in the response of the Pharisees, where it says, and some of the Pharisees called to him from the crowd, Teacher, rebuke your disciples. So in other words, they don't recognize who Jesus is. Then Jesus says, well, sorry, this is of cosmic significance. This is an act of salvation. As it also says later, that the time of your visitation, it's highly significant. He's come here for your salvation. And they haven't recognized it. And Jesus says, if they don't cry it out, the stones will cry it out. Because this is a time of salvation for Jerusalem, but which they all also reject. Also the passage hereafter, if we go to verses 41 to 44, again we must connect that with what Jesus says in chapter 13, verses 31 to 35. Because it says in verse 41, now as he drew near, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, if you had known, even you, especially in this your day, the things that make for your peace. Remember Jesus sitting on a donkey. If you go read Zechariah 9, verses 10, it says he's come to bring peace. Now Jesus also says, I've come here for your peace. If you could only have recognized it. Then he also says, but now they are hidden from your eyes. And then Jesus also speaks here of Jerusalem's destruction. Because Israel, the people, they want war. And Jesus speaks of your enemies will come to you, they will surround you, there will be siege ramps, and your city and your temple will be destroyed. So, Jesus is coming here on a donkey. He is the King of Israel. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Shouted by his disciples from Galilee, not from Jerusalem, because they did not recognize this day, the day of their visitation, this King who brings peace to them. And also Jesus' fulfillment of that prophecy of Zechariah 9, verses 9 to 10. He's the King of Israel, the King of peace, who wants to bring salvation to Jerusalem. But unfortunately, the city and its leaders did not recognize him.